Welcome in, Shield Brothers and Shield Maidens. I'm True for Shield's Rest, and today I'm actually joined by Daniel from BladeBound Saga. Daniel, welcome to Shield's Rest. Do you want to go ahead and give a little bit of an introduction as to who you are and what you guys do over at BladeBound Saga?
Yeah. So my name is Daniel, otherwise known as RiceKombo Online, if you've seen me on any of the Discords. And I am the owner and creator of BladeBound Saga. What we basically do over there is we do a bunch of nerdy content, and the hot topic right now is Daggerheart. So for the foreseeable future, it's going to be Daggerheart content. We do Let's Plays. We'll soon be coming out with after launch build guides, and just all sorts of experimental and fun things that we're going to be going over in Daggerheart space. So yeah, that's what I do over there. Nothing too crazy.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Love that. Yeah, check out his channel when you get a chance. Alright, so today we are actually talking about Daggerheart and our top 10 things that we love and are hyped for the system. But this is actually only going to be 5 items because the other half of the list is on the BladeBound Saga side. So make sure to check that out so you can get the full list for what we're excited about and everything that we think about for those particular items. Because we did actually have a good conversation for those 5 items. That was pretty solid. But we're going to go ahead and start off with our number 5 here, and that's going to be campaign frames. What has been your experience with campaign frames? How many of them have you tried out? Have you done them all? Like, what's been your experience there?
So, first thing about campaign frames, I have to admit to a truth that I'm not proud of. I did not know we had campaign frames in the beta. I played the whole beta without touching the campaign frames, because for some reason I somehow skipped, and I promise you, I swear I read through everything, but I somehow skipped through Witherwild and Five Banners Burning, and still have not touched them to this day. But as soon as I started hearing on one of the updates, Matt talking about Age of Umbra, I was like, okay, variant rules sound sick.
Right.
And then Beast Feast came out. Or they released Beast Feast at PAX U. I sat in on the live audience since I was there, and one, it was just a blast to watch it happen live. But the one thing that the normal audience that watched in the re-recorded or recorded stream, they did not show a lot of the screens and information that they were showing on stage, because they had the camera focused on them at the table. So I took screenshots. I spent way too long dissecting and zooming in on every single word, and I was able to transcribe every single shot of what the Beast Feast book would look like. And I have been running Beast Feast as a campaign frame since the beginning of this year, so since January.
Nice.
And I'm actually now running 2 Beast Feast campaigns because I love the campaign frame so much. And for those who don't know, Beast Feast campaign is essentially a delicious and dungeon meshy style game where the creatures you kill, you instead get to start taking pieces of their of them, and you cook them, and that is essentially the rest mechanic. So it takes out rests all entirely, and you basically are cooking food to regain your hope, regain your health, regain your stress, and so those variant rules were something that I really wasn't expecting, but absolutely fell in love with. And I think in a topic that we talked about before, it has so much room to grow because of stuff like campaign frames. What about you?
Funny enough, I've only read through them, but I actually haven't tried playing them. Same like you, I haven't even tried them. The one time I got exposed to it was this exact same video that you're talking about that you were actually there for. I only got to watch the video, but when Matt started talking about campaign frames and getting into Age of Umbra, I was like, that's a brilliant idea to really cut down an entire campaign book down to really what you need and what you would actually use, rather than trying to give you this entire thing. So to me, I've loved the idea, and it's mainly me using bits and pieces of it and not really having used the entire thing. But the main thing I actually took from that are the countdowns from Five Banners Burning. The different ways that you're basically tracking nations completing certain objectives to really and truly reach their end goal, and how they actually can almost hinder each other, which is kind of a fun part of that. But I think there's a lot there. It's just I need to, actually use them a little bit more than just some of those pieces. But that just kind of shows how versatile campaign frames can actually be and how they just can give you rules, and you don't even need the named things that they're using within the campaign frames. You could just use some of those basic rules, like Beast Feast, for instance. You can just go ahead and use some of that without having to use the entire thing if you didn't want to. So I do love that about campaign frames. And I'm looking forward to see what else they come up with in the future for those particular areas. Like, what else could they go into besides Age of Umbra, obviously. I do want to know for that one.
So here's the thing. I have spent way too much time on the internet, and I have scoured and scrounged every interview that I possibly can. Officially, we know the 6 campaign frames that are going to be at launch. So we know Witherwild and Five Banners Burning. Those are going to be joined in. We know Beast Feast. We know Age of Umbra, which is the Grim Dark one. Then there should be a campaign frame that was in a Bob the World Builder video interview with Rowan and Spencer, which was, and they basically talked about one called Colossus of the Drylands. They explained it as Shadow of the Colossus meets post-apocalyptic Western future. So really random, all sorts of things out there. But I'm like, okay, I don't know what to make of that. But it sounds like a sick amalgamation of stuff. And then there should be one called Quantum Academy, which I can only assume that that's sci-fi based on the name, but we have no information about. The beta name I think was called Motherboard.
Yes, I remember they were talking about Motherboard for a little bit, but if they renamed it, then that's probably all it is a renaming and maybe a few changes.
Yeah. So I'm excited to see what those other 3, Age of Umbra, Colossus, and Quantum Academy, are going to end up actually being mechanically.
Yeah, and I'd be curious to see how that actually affects a lot of the encounters that you can actually build within Daggerheart, how that might alter things. What has kind of been your experience in encounter building, and what have you found to be a really good balance, but also a really great way to threaten the players, like really scare the crap out of your players, if you've tried it that way at all?
Yeah. So I think encounter building initially was kind of a trial and error. I think every GM, it's trial and error, and hopefully you don't kill your players. Hopefully. Or maybe that's your goal. Maybe you're trying to kill your players, and for some reason they just don't die. I've also been on that side of the thing, too.
Oh, God, no.
But I think with encounter building, after trial and error, I think the one thing that really helps is everything's broken down into tiers rather than a rating that other systems will use. And I think the hardest part about some rating is it oftentimes ends up being kind of arbitrary. Like, why was this rated this? This doesn't really make any sense. I don't really know what to do with this number. But in Daggerheart, the great thing about encounter building is if they're tier 1 players, so that means they're level 1, or if they're tier 2, that means levels 2 to 4, you look for an adversary in the tier 2 or in the tier 1 category appropriate to what you're throwing at them, and that should be an appropriate encounter for that level, which I think takes away a lot of the guesswork from trying to figure out, is this going to kill my players or is it not? Because as a GM, I don't normally want to kill my players. There are times where narratively I need this big bad to be threatening enough, otherwise this is just going to feel super bad and it's going to feel like a cakewalk, and it doesn't hit those right narrative notes. But I know you've been doing a lot of encounter building on your channel, and I've been watching some of those videos, and they've been really helpful, just to kind of hear another GM's perspective. But for those who haven't seen, that are coming maybe from my channel or from others, what's your perspective?
So for me, I feel pretty much the same way that you do. I felt like that CR rating really wasn't helpful. It doesn't really tell you, and it really was trial and error for a lot of those CR situations where you're like, okay, maybe this is about right, and then you either shellac your players or your players just walk all over it, and you're like, where's the happy medium? How do I get there? Pre-planned getting there for where my players are currently at. And I think that's where Daggerheart really solved that by having that easy, standard, challenging, and climactic encounters and what to expect, like what you should plug and play with. And then it gives you a lot of areas to kind of hot swap some certain adversaries in, particularly types of adversaries, which the types of adversaries
is so good.
So good. It's incredible because now you can actually build an entire encounter without ever having looked at the stat block for that adversary. If I know that I have a bruiser and a couple of standards and the right tier for my party, plug and play, you're good. Whatever that is. Yep. You can just throw them together and you're fine. And you're going to have an easy encounter. If I bring a leader and a couple of minions and they're of the same tier, it's going to be a challenging encounter. I know that from the get-go. I don't have to think twice about that. And that is what's so satisfying as a GM. It's very satisfying when you can create a balanced, power level sort of encounter for your players, and you already know what they're going to, like, what to expect from that encounter. You don't have a lot of guesswork, like, am I going to kill him this time? Like, no, that's not even a question. You already know. And I think that's what's so great and securing in that, is you have that knowledge going into it, and you have the confidence that you're not going to kill them, but you could possibly maim them pretty badly, but that's about it.
So I will say, and I'm curious to see how you feel about this, because I really struggle with random encounters in other systems, especially when I'm trying to find stats for random encounters. In Daggerheart, I don't feel like I'm struggling nearly as much. Like, I can grab, say, if we're walking in the woods and I'm like, I just need to throw something at them because I feel like there'd be a threat about here, I can grab like the vampire stat block, drop it in there, and then just reskin all the mechanics because of how some of the simplicity is too. Like, it's like, yeah, normally the vampire would probably be using some sort of blood magic, but this time it's some sort of weird like fungal or fungus thing that's beginning to sap from you, and because of the simplicity of it just being magic damage and not being this type of damage, I can kind of just grab and plug and play kind of on a whim. That I did have some difficulty, even especially once again with balance in other systems.
Right, and I think that's kind of where I love Chapter 6 of the 1.5 manuscript, is that it actually gives you all those tables. So if for whatever reason the players decide to pick a fight out of nowhere and I wasn't even ready for that kind of situation, I can just be like, hey guys, I'm going to use the restroom real quick, and then I can scurry away into the restroom with my Chapter 6 and go ahead and build them out really quick if I needed to, you know? Because it is so easy to build adversaries actually on the fly because of those tables that are back there. I can go, you know what, I want this to be major damage at tier 1, I can see that.
Yep.
I can just go, okay, cool, 2d4 plus 5 physical damage, gotcha. Or I can run into, like, okay, what's the difficulty this should be at? Okay, probably around a battle of 11. Let's go 12 just for fun, and then we can go from there. I don't have to think a whole lot about that and go too crazy with it. And especially if you know, like, okay, I've got a bar fight, and I've got a bruiser here. Let me go ahead and give them, like, something like knockdown, where I just want to make the player vulnerable based off of this knockdown move. It doesn't take me long to come up with these features, but I'm excited for their feature list because that'll make it even easier when building these adversaries. But yes, building adversaries on the fly is so much better, and it's balanced right from the get-go because you know tier 1 damage, great. Tier 1 difficulty, your players can deal with that. Or maybe they can't and they're going to have to run, and that's kind of what you're going for. Yeah. You can, whatever you intend, you can do. So yeah, I love that. That's a great point.
So, cool.
But getting into that, actually, I think that's where we're going to get into a lot of collaboration and collaborative type play, but also bringing in some of those player experiences that are going to be so crucial, because this is kind of a twofer area that we had been tied at almost, where it almost is the exact same thing, but not completely, with the player experience mechanic rather, and then obviously that collaborative play. So what have been your experiences? How have your players felt really and truly when it comes to player experiences and that collaboration?
I think so. I run a lot of learn to plays. I've run the Sablewood Messengers one shot probably over 20 times, and then I'm going to be running it more at Gen Con. Nice. I'm very familiar with that adventure, and I think the thing that catches players off, and I will say, it's probably like a 85% love it, 15% or 10% are confused, 5% hate. Kind of like whenever you start to implement some of those things. Because one of the things that's in that quick start that I immediately latched onto, because this is how I've been, and even in like 5e when I was gymming that system, was when you walk into the tavern in that quick start, you describe a very general like 2 sentences of what they initially see, and then you start asking them. I think one of the question is like you notice something in the room that catches you off guard or something like that. I've run it so much that honestly I don't even read the book anymore. I just kind of run it, and I've even asked the question. It's like you notice that there's a mural on the ceiling right above the bar that reminds you of home. Why? What is it, and why does it remind you of home? And adding those like questions of like what is in the bar makes it their bar. Like they're the ones experiencing it, and admittedly, it does take work off of me. Like it in most cases, in 90% of the games that I've run, it doesn't matter what the hell is in the bar. Like the tavern could have floating seats, it could have orcs, it could have sometimes the orcs might be a thing because it depends on what the orcs are doing. But sometimes like it could have whatever you want in that tavern, and it will not change the narrative. And then just asking your player like what they would see, I think really like you start in most cases like everyone is like oh I get to describe this, and they get that sense of like I see an image of a mage. It's like, oh, okay, there's a mage. Let's see where this story goes. Like I'm invested into what the player's saying, and so I think that's it's really fun to be able to bring them into that story, and it for new players it especially like catches them off guard a little bit. But you do see that joy of world building that us as GMs see all the time.
Right, and I love that it brings it to the players in such a wonderful sort of way, because everyone's already thinking about what they're seeing, and they're already seeing different things, but now when you start to pull that out of them, everyone gets to see what they're seeing, and all of a sudden that image changes for everybody, and now, like you said, they are more invested, but now you as a GM get to kind of practice a little bit of that improv and staying on your toes, because now the player says, let's say that mage mural, well, okay, great, now you get to come up with a little bit of a backstory on that tavern for those players all of a sudden, because they had that one little idea of a mural with a mage.
Because now all of a sudden it could just be going to be like, what? Yeah, like what's with the mage up there? It's like, oh yeah, thanks, you just created that, but I'll go ahead and tell you what's up with that mage.
Yeah, I'll tell you about your idea. Yeah, okay, 1 second. Let me get this real quick. Yeah, and then all of a sudden now you have like an old adventurer that maybe did some spell, like was a bit of a sorcerer or whatever. And now owns the bar or whatever. You get to have so much fun with other people's ideas, and you don't always have to feel like it's yours constantly. It just alleviates so much of that stress, but makes you more engaged. Like you're now way more engaged because you don't know what they're going to say. So you're paying attention as well. Not only are your players paying attention, but now you are even more so. Especially if you've run it 20 times, like that can get old really quick until like basically different ideas come up because of all the different players that you now have at your table with this. So I absolutely love collaborative play. Oh yeah? Good. I'm glad.
So yeah.
God, that's the fun part right there. That, and then the player experiences. You don't know what they're going to come up with for their player experience and how they're going to actually bring that into their character and how they see them utilizing that for their character. And I think that's a fun part too, especially with something that can sometimes be kind of vague in the way that the player experience is titled. I think that's kind of a fun way to bring in certain elements that they think about, so that way you can put it more on them when they're utilizing that. Okay, well, describe to me how you're actually using that experience for this particular situation. So much fun. And what has been your experience with that?
They will always try to push their experiences too. It's like, it's like, can I use like we're in the middle of a fight. It's like, can I use 7 Cs here? It's like, okay, we're in the middle of a cave. Explain to me how, and if you can do so, I'll allow it. And sometimes they surprise you. It's like, okay, I'll allow this. Okay, this makes sense. I'll allow it.
What's been the most outlandish one for you? Just off the top of your head, if you got one prepped right like that, what's been the most outlandish one that's actually been convincing enough to say, you know what, I'll allow it?
Oh man, this one's. I think so. This you'll actually see this on the BladeBound channel right now. Currently launching is our. I did a collaboration with a bunch of other content creators here on YouTube, and one of them was I think it was AK's character named Delia, who is a fungal ribbit, or no, a fairy ribbit guardian, and one of their experiences was just like all the small things. And I think it came to my conclusion that I do need to have a little bit of guidance sometimes, because sometimes they do get so vague that they kind of apply in every single situation. Because as a fairy ribbit, they were like 2 feet tall, and so they are permanently in a state of always a small being, and so like all the small things could technically apply everywhere. And it wasn't necessarily one that didn't apply, but it applied a little too often, because of just how broad it was. So to answer the question by not answering the question, that's what it would be. That's
fair. I mean, generalized like that is very fair because they're going to just keep applying it in so many different outlandish ways that it's like, well, I can't say no because it does work, but at the same time, damn it, we need something a little more specific.
Like, so, if you're a Simia and your experience is, I'm a monkey, it's like, yes, you're a monkey all the time. That doesn't change ever.
And now they get the permanent +3 to whatever they do, assuming that they spend the hope. Yeah. Which, actually, speaking of hope, funny enough, that kind of brings us to our next bit here, which is going to be the resources and core mechanics. What have you enjoyed so far from the core mechanics and some of those resources that they now have access to as players and even for you as a GM?
Yeah. And so this one definitely bleeds. If you like, I will say if you we're gonna pick up a little bit on like our conversation that we had when we talked about duality dice, because you can't talk about duality dice without talking about hope and fear. So if you haven't seen that part and you've made it this far, go back to watch the other video. But I think with hope and fear, it is a mechanic, and I will say what I said last time, which as a resources aren't limited. We do have like some things like once per session, once per rest kind of mechanics, which are a little bit they are designed to be stronger mechanics that do have that limit. But with most of the mechanics in the system, hope and fear, and even stress, because you can even use stress to use abilities, you're never at a point where you're fully out. Unlike spell slots in other systems, when you use your 3rd level slot and you only had 1 3rd level slot, you no longer can cast that 3rd level spell. But in Daggerheart, if it costs 2 hope and you fight and you gain those 2 hope back, or another player gives you those 2 hope, now you're ready. Now you're recharged. It really kind of hits that. I think that we talked a little bit about anime already, but that moment of it's like, no, it's not ready yet. It's like I'm still recharging. It's like, you can have that moment to recharge and then fire away, or if you have the bard, it's like I need some mana or whatever. Like you shout out to the bard, and the bard plays the song, rejuvenating your mana, and now you have the hope to cast Unleash Power or whatever it may be. Yeah, I think it has those effects, which was always a tension for me, especially with if you can cast 1st level spells. And you just can't cast 3rd level spells, but you still have magic in you, just not that kind of magic, always felt weird to me.
I completely agree with that, and I love the way that you can now utilize it in many different ways to cast spells. Like, it's not just hope, but you can still use stress for some of those spells, and sometimes it's just a spell cast roll, and then something else on top to be able to do so. Absolutely love that, and the ways that you can regain it, everything. But I love, even as a GM, the way that you can use these resources for, and sometimes even against the players. Because I like to use stress against the players sometimes, where I'll sap their their different little slots for stress, because, let's face it, they've had a hard day of hiking. And like every hour is going to cause them a stress because it's just that extraneous, especially with what they got on their back. Or it's just so hot out, or it's just so cold that trying to maneuver is impossible without them spending that stress. So I think there's a lot of ways that you can utilize these things in different creative sort of ways to be able to utilize this that makes it more interesting when it comes to travel, when it comes to combat, even social encounters, especially when you can cause your players stress through some of the social encounters, especially when they are not socially enabled. They're just the individuals that do not want to do the social things. That can be so much fun as a mechanic for that particular player, for that particular character rather, to be able to utilize that against them and really hone in what that character is a little bit more. Like, oh, I got to deal with these social situations. Do I have enough stress?
Yeah, and I think it is one of those things too where in a session, because I've had many sessions where it's just all RP, and you're just talking to kings, you're talking to you're trying to negotiate with a pirate. You don't want to do damage to the pirate. You don't want the pirate to do damage to you. You don't want to enter in combat because you're kind of surrounded. But you can begin to use abilities to kind of like pull at their like mental strain. And I think having a separate resource bar that is not tied to the physicality of a person and kind of that mental strain with stress, I think does expand the options of...
Yes.
It's not just, it's like, I defeat this encounter by killing everything. You can defeat the encounter by just talking it through. And sometimes those talks can be stressful. So I think that's a really great separation of health pools, I guess.
Yeah.
So.
No, I absolutely agree, which actually kind of brings us into our final point here, which is combat, because you obviously are going to be using your core mechanics and resources during combat, but that's kind of, I think, the one thing that I think we both are really in love with, and that's the no initiative side of combat. What was it difficult for you to transfer into using no initiative, and if so, like, what did you end up doing to kind of help that along and mitigate down, like, or really get skilled and more proficient at that?
So I think my number one strain has always been how long combats take. Every so often I really love those like full session combats, like we're fighting in through a dungeon, we're fighting the big bad. It's just gonna take some time. But there does get to a point where it's just like you are combat fatigued. Like I have been rolling, I'm waiting for my turn. 20, 30 minutes have gone by and now it's my turn. And the reality is, especially for, I have a lot of friends with ADHD, or even just normal, like, not being able to pay attention, the distraction of your phone, just taking it out and, like, just scrolling and like, oh, it's my turn. What happened? Oh, okay. Oh, I'm going to do this. Or the inconsistency of, like, getting to your turn after 20 minutes. And it's like, yeah, I'm just going to attack 3 times. Well, that was my turn. And then you go back into, like, waiting. I think there are so many things that no combat or no initiative helps, because that was kind of another strain of mine. It's like I wanted combats to be more dynamic. I want people to be more involved, and I have tried other systems with pretty good okay success. I tried the City of the Mist system. Tried DC-20, which is kind of another way to combat the it's not necessarily no initiative, but you're always active in your turns for that in that system. But with Daggerheart, it was a medley of a lot of really good ways of making combat always something everyone can be involved in. Like, I think by removing the initiative, anyone can go at any time. So everyone kind of wants to pay attention. Like, you can't really not pay attention because you might have a moment that you want to step in.
Absolutely. I completely agree, because that's been my biggest issue. Is I used to think I was just a bad GM at that point. Like, how are they all this distracted and going up, using the restroom, grabbing snacks, drinks, taking a walk around the park, Like, it was almost to the point where I was like, guys, come on now. But then you realize that the combat's really just that boring, because really and truly, you're waiting for one dude to go ahead and take his entire turn. And sometimes that can be a lot when they're like measuring and they're trying to get all the distances right. Okay, going through their abilities, and half of it sometimes is the players not knowing what they can do, and so therefore are not really ready to go. But it's just so difficult from that aspect, whereas no initiative, they now have to be paying attention. They now have to be helping each other out, even, especially when you as a GM pass the spotlight to a player in particular because of of something that the adversary did to that player. Now, of course, they're going to need to respond to that, right? Especially if you've got shy players, you really want to bring them in a little bit more. So sometimes handing them that spotlight is very helpful. So that way, you almost kind of pull that out, and then if you have that overly energetic individual, they start helping the shy player with what they can do, maybe giving them ideas for the things that they might be able to do in this moment, so that way they can then come in and help them out. There's a lot of ways that this actually turns collaborative and brings the team together in a better cohesion than you would otherwise expect. And it really just solves all the issues that I've had with combat from that other system in particular, because it was just so straining. And you almost didn't even want to get into those combats because it was just going to be a strain on the play, on the entire game itself, and then particularly on you at that point. So this, I find, helps so much more.
I think one thing, and we didn't even cover this, and which honestly probably should be in the top 10, but once again, there's so many different topics in here, is I think with combat, it is one thing that really lends it to being so streamlined, is the players literally have a fixed number of cards in their hands. 5, and then maybe like the 3 class, or the class and foundation,
community,
and then you have your community as an ancestry. So 9 cards, and then you do a vault if you're at higher levels. But it takes away from a lot of that analysis paralysis too, where you're not looking at a sheet and flipping back and forth, or if you're using an online portal, clicking through the different tabs. Your cards are right in front of you, and Demiplane does a really good job of even highlighting like what features you have, even if you're only using an online portal. So it's a limit. So it's weird because you have less things to do, but somehow I feel like I have more options.
Yes, and it's the way that the domain cards are worded, I think, that gives it that vagueness enough and specific enough that it gives you room to interpret it a little bit more and give it a little bit more text flavor in there, just something that's a little bit more narrative flavor, rather than something that's actually very specific, like a lot of the spells and a lot of the features. You feel like you're almost stuck, and you have no way of actually creating anything interesting and dynamic. But somehow the vagueness really does help that along instead of some of the more specific things that go on in other systems. It just helps out so much because now you can almost interpret that card in a different way that allows you to do the thing that you're really wanting to do in the end anyways. So yeah, I agree completely, especially with the analysis paralysis. You're just like, I could do so many things. What do I do? You know, but with only 5 options and maybe a few more, you're not freaking out about it, and especially if some of those things are a mainstay to your style, you're just going to already know. You're going to be like, you're going to fall right into all the things that your character would do with their particular style of combat.
Yeah. I think it's also one of those things that with what you have, and I think when you talked about vagueness, it reminded me of just like some of the shapes that you can create with your spells in a fixed system. It's like, it must be a circle, it must be a line, it's a square. It almost begs the questions like, if I can cast a line of fire, like if I can cast a wall of fire, what's stopping me from making the letter like a curved wall? Like, and because it just says a wall of fire, I think it does say from point to point. I think the system itself, this goes past what is rules as written. The system does say, it's like, go with what feels the best narratively. Like, very much like Rule of Cool It. If you want to make, for some reason, a letter S wall of fire for whatever tactical advantage, as a GM, most of the time it's like, all right, well, we'll make it a smaller line, but sure, I don't see why your character wouldn't have the arcane prowess to curve your wall. Like, let's go for it. And so I think having a little bit of that vagueness makes it so that way you lose some of these like weird, a wall of fire must be a line, a wall of fire must be a circle. It's like, there are other shapes out there. So I think that helps a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think we could keep adding to this list. I mean, we could almost talk forever, I think, on Daggerheart and all the things that are so great about it and what it really solves, all the things it does for you. But we'd be here for an hour and a half at the very least. Just chatting consistently. So, but thank you for coming on the channel today and doing this.
Thank you for coming on mine.
Love this. Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely want to do this again in the future if you'd have me at that point. But for those of you that are not subscribed to his channel, go ahead and check out the BladeBound Saga. I'm going to have it in the comments so that way you're able to just quickly click on it and go and subscribe, because he got a lot of great content out there, so check him out. But y'all, until the next one, keep that shield wall strong.